So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Kung ano nyo mang oras pinapanood itong video na to. So I am Carl Jayson B. Shera, to AB Psychology A student. Task in the last part of the chapter assigned to us, the chapter 12, Decision Making and Reasoning. And I will be discussing to you the part of the inductive reasoning. So, for our topic outline for this report, number one, we will be discussing, of course, about inductive reasoning. We will define or know what is inductive reasoning. Also, we will be tackling about the two inferences, the causal and the categorical inferences. Also, we will be giving examples in reasoning by analogy. And of course, we will also be discussing an alternative view of reasoning. And of course, in connection to our subject, cognitive psychology, we will know what are or what is the neuroscience of reasoning. Let us start. So now let us first define or know what is inductive reasoning. So our module or our reference book defined inductive reasoning as the process of reasoning from specific facts or observation to reach a likely conclusion that may explain the facts. It is also similar to the definition that the internet gave about inductive reasoning, which is a method of drawing conclusions by going from specific to general. So from here, para mas maintindihan natin what is inductive reasoning, I've underlined key terms na ma-identify natin agad that it is a term defining inductive reasoning, and that is specific to general. From having specific facts, specific observation, specific instances, specific experiences, or specific events, we could reach to a likely conclusion that may explain that event. Or we could say we could reach a likely general conclusion. But then remember, this is also a key feature in inductive reasoning that in inductive reasoning, a logically certain conclusion can never be reached. It is also contrasting to deductive reasoning. So to further understand this last statement, we should go on with the report. So this example um, is given by our reference book. So here, ang sinabi niya dito that suppose that you notice that all people enrolled in your cognitive psychology course are on the dean's list or the honor roll. From these observations, you could reason inductively that all students who enroll in cognitive psychology are excellent students, or at least earn the grades to give that impression. However, unless you can observe the grade point averages of all people who ever have taken or prove or ever will take cognitive psychology, you will be unable to prove your conclusion. Furthermore, a single poor student who happened to enroll in a cognitive psychology course would disprove your conclusion. Still, after large numbers of observation, you might conclude that you had made enough observations to reason inductively. So this example would explain the last statement that even after those specific and observation we had about students enrolled in cognitive psychology having high grades to be on the list of honor or on the list of being a dean's lister, we could not say that it is a logically we could not say that it is a logically certain conclusion, even though we had so many observations to prove our general conclusion that all enrolled students in cognitive psychology are all excellent students, mayroon pa ring point na baka may mga enrollees or mga students na ma-enroll doon na hindi pala matataas talaga yung grades, which will disprove your reasoning. Next is very important or a term also used in inductive reasoning, the new riddle of induction. So here, given possible alternative futures, how do we know which one to predict? For example, in the number series 246, most people would replace the question mark with an 8. So bakit? Bakit kaya 8 talaga usually yung sinasagot natin? So here is also the explanation coming from our reference book. We chose the pattern of ascending even numbers. Partly we choose it because it seems simple to us. It is a less complex formula than others we might choose. And partly we choose it because we are familiar with it. We are used to ascending series of even numbers, but we are not used to other complex series. So kasi yun na yung nakasanayan natin from specific na 2, 4, 6, we generally conclude that 8 na yung kasunod even though sometimes meron pa ring mga mathematical formula na magdi-disprove that hindi always 8 yung kasunod ng 2, 4, 6. Next is this is also an example or yes, an example from our reference book. Inductive reasoning forms the basis of empirical method. In it, we cannot logically leap from saying all observed instances to date of x are y to saying therefore all x are y. It is always possible that the next observed x will not be y. So to further um understand this statement, here's an example. You may say that all swans that you have ever seen are white. However, you cannot form the conclusion then that all swans are white because the next one you happen upon might be black, and indeed black swans do exist. So like the mga sinabi ko earlier, that even though we do have a specific experience or observation na lahat ng swan na nakikita natin ay color puti, hindi pa rin tayo makakalip into a logically certain conclusion na lahat ng swans ay white. Kasi malay mo sa susunod may ma-encounter ka ng black swans at totoo nga na yung mga black swans ay nag-exist. So we also use inductive reasoning to form the basis of empirical method when rejecting the null hypothesis. We never know for sure whether we are correct in rejecting a null hypothesis. So in rejecting a null hypothesis, hindi naman talaga tayo sure if mare-reject natin yung null hypothesis, but we use inductive reasoning for us to form the basic of this empirical method. Also, our book reference cited reasons why people use inductive reasoning. It is because number one, it helps them to become increasingly able to make sense out of great variability in their environment. And number two, it helps them to predict events in their environment, thereby reducing their uncertainty. So in addition, with those information defining or supporting what is inductive reasoning, we reach inferences by generalizing some broad understanding from a set of specific instances. But as we observe additional instances, we further broaden our understanding, or we may infer specialized exceptions to general understanding. So, kagaya ng mga past na example like yung sa swan na may exception kasi hindi naman pala lahat ng swan more than sa alam natin na mga swans ay white, meron palang mga black. So may mga specialized exemption. So this next example would be a further support for this statement. So this example, after observing quite a few birds, we may infer that birds can fly. But after observing penguins and ostriches, we may add to our generalized knowledge a specialized exceptions for flightless birds. So, 'di ba? We from specific observations of birds na nakikita nating lumilipad sila, we could generalize that all birds fly. But then when we observe or when we have an instances with these penguins and ostriches, we could generate or we could have a generalized knowledge to have a specialized exceptions na meron palang mga flightless birds amidst dun sa naging general conclusion natin na all birds can fly. Okay, we're done with the first topic, which is the inductive reasoning, defining what is inductive reasoning. Now we are on the second part, which is the causal inferences. So what is causal inferences? Causal inferences is how people make judgments about whether something causes something else. If people see two events paired enough, they come to believe that the first causes the second. So people tend to demonstrate confirmation bias, which may lead us to errors such as illusory correlations. And furthermore, we frequently make mistakes when attempting to determine causality based on correlational evidence alone. Correlational evidence cannot indicate the direction of causation. So sometimes, because um, of the relativity of two events, na nagja-judge tayo in accordance to that this event affect this event, or this event causes this event rather. So this example, suppose we observe a correlation between factor A and factor B. We may find out that we may find out of three things. Number one, it may be that factor A causes factor B. It may be that factor B causes factor A, or some higher order factor C may be causing both factors A and B to occur together. So based on this correlational data, we cannot determine which of the three options indeed causes the observed phenomenon. So like the earlier statement, sabi doon sa confirmation bias, that we frequently make mistake when attempting to determine causality based on correlational evidence alone. So sometimes, no, yung tendency natin to demonstrate confirmation bias could lead us also to errors in terms of the general conclusion we have. So once we have identified one of the suspected causes of a phenomenon, we may commit what is known as a discounting error. This discounting error means we stop searching for additional alternative or contributing causes. So, like the example na if we found out that factor A is the one causes factor B, nagsistop na tayo doon. We do not try to search additional alternative or contributing causes for it. Kasi nga, yung relationship ng dalawa, yung correlation ng dalawa is ginagamit natin to judge it, to make a general conclusion. So confirmation biases again can have a major effect on our everyday lives, and a great example is in school, the teacher's tendency of self-fulfilling prophecies rather. So teachers often expect little of students when they think them low in ability. The students then give the teachers little, the teacher's original beliefs are thereby confirmed. But sometimes this is also not true, because sometimes if teachers expect little of a students at yung naibibigay ng student ay more than doon din nagki-question yung teacher sa general conclusion niya na mahina or hindi magaling yung student na yun. That's why sometimes teachers are na ano, may general conclusion sila na sometimes this child cheat kasi nga may ano sila, may self-fulfilling processes na sila within that student na hindi naman pala talaga sometimes totoo. So next, we are into categorical inferences. So categorical inference, one makes a judgment about whether something is or likely to be a member of a certain category. So, for example, upon seeing an animal one has never seen before, a person with a limited knowledge of dogs may be confident that what he is seeing is a dog, but less certain about the specific species. So, on what basis do people draw inferences? So, there are two things we can generally use both the bottom-up strategies and the top-down strategies. I believe these strategies was already tackled with the past reporters, so I will not gonna be expound this more para bawas din sa time na mako-consume. So that is, they use both information from their sensory experiences and information based on what they already know or have inferred previously. So what is this bottom and a bottom-up rather and top-down strategies. So we define them. Bottom strategies are based on observing various instances and considering the degree of variability across instances, while these top-down strategies include selectively searching for constancies within many variations and selectively combining existing concepts and categories. So from these strategies or from this observation, we abstract a so-called prototype. Once a prototype or a category, this prototype can also be called category, has been induced, the individual may use focus sampling to add new instances to the category. He or she focuses chiefly on properties that have provided useful distinctions in the past. So our past observations, kapag may bago tayong nakikita or may bago tayong instances, experience, na ilalagay natin yon to the available past category na meron tayo. So next is we have the reasoning by analogy. So in inductive reasoning, or rather inductive reasoning may be applied to a broader range of situations than those requiring causal or categorical inferences. Inductive reasoning may also be applied to reasoning by analogy. So what is this reasoning by analogy? To argue or to reason by analogy is to argue or to reason that because two things are similar, what is true of one is also true of the another. It is a kind of reasoning that is based on finding a common relational system between two situations, exemplars or domains. When such a common system can be found, then what is known about one situation can be used to infer new information about the other. So this reasoning by analogy is also used in our everyday life. It is when people make predictions about their environment, and based on this prediction, we connect perception with memories by means of analogies, and these analogies can activate concepts and items stored in the mind that are similar to the current input, and we can have prediction of what is likely in a given situation. So not only reasoning by analogy is used in our everyday lives, but also specifically, we can use this in the application of analogies in reasoning, or should I say, application of analogies in reasoning can also be seen in politics. So, analogies can help governing bodies come to conclusions, and these analogies also can be effectively used to conveying the justification of the decision to the public. However, the use of analogies is not always successful. So, for example, we will give three, I think two or three example for us to know what is this reasoning by analogy, or did we experience, 'di ba? Or na try na ba natin ito mga reasoning by analogy? So first example is fire is too asbestos and as water is to blank. So 'di ba, common ito siya sa mga test natin, sa mga inductive reasoning or inductive test na tinatry natin, especially in entrance examination. So in reasoning by analogy, the reasoner must observe the first pair of item fire and asbestos in this example and must induce from those two items one or more relations. In this case, surface resistance because surfaces coated with asbestos can resist fire. The reasoner then must apply the given relation in the second part of the analogy. In the example analogy, the reasoner chooses the solution to the vinyl because surfaces coated with vinyl can resist water. So here we use reasoning analogy by knowing or by inducing the relationship with the two items. So first, the fire and the asbestos, kaya makikita natin kung ano yung pinaka may relationship sa water na similar to the other relation ng dalawang items. Next is in the difficulty of encoding can become even greater in various puzzling analogies. So this is an example here. Rat and tar and bat is to blank. A concrete, B mammal, C tab, D Dale. So it is obvious that most of us will answer tab. Why? The difficulty is in encoding the analogy as one involving letter reversal rather than semantic content for its solution. So same, tinitingnan natin yung relationship doon sa dalawang nauna, at yun din yung i-base natin for our conclusion or general conclusion sa pangalawa. Next, in a problematic analogy such as the following, the difficulty is in recognizing the meanings of the words. For example, audacious, timorous, mitigate, blank. If listeners know the meanings of the words, they probably will find it relatively easy to figure out that the relationship is one of the antonyms. Yes, so here, mas advantageous if may knowledge tayo or if yung vocabulary natin is malawak, because in recognizing the meaning of the word, we could not have or encounter difficulty in answering this type of test or this type of reasoning by analogy. So now we are down to an alternative view of reasoning. So an alternative perspective on reasoning is the dual process theory. Contends that two complementary systems of reasoning can be distinguished. So these two complementary system is first the associative system, and the second is the rule-based system. I will not read furthermore its meaning because it will be also in the next slides. So associative system involves mental operations based on observed similarities and temporal contiguities. So associative, sa word pa lang na yun, we associate things with their similarities and temporal contiguities. So what are its key features here in associative system? So associative system can lead to speedy responses that are highly sensitive to patterns and to general tendencies. Also, detection of similarities between observed patterns and patterns stored in memory. And people may pay more attention to salient features than to defining features of a pattern. So here, we also impose rather than loose constraints that may inhibit the selection of patterns that are poor matches to the observed pattern. So an example of the associative system is a representative heuristic, belief bias effect, and a false consensus effect. So what are these? Belief bias effect occurs when people agree more with the syllogism than affirm people's beliefs, whether or not these syllogisms are logically valid. While this false consensus effect, people believe that their own behavior and judgments are more common and more appropriate than those of the other people. The next view or perspective is the rule-based system. So this rule-based system involves manipulation based on the relations among symbols. So more deliberate procedures for reaching conclusions, a careful analyzing of relevant features of the available data based on the rules stored in memory imposes rigid constraints that rule out possibilities that violate the rules and evidence. And here are the evidence in favor of rule-based reasoning. This was also from our reference book. So people can recognize logical arguments when they are explained to them. People can recognize the need to make categorization based on defining features despite similarities in typical features, and people can rule out impossibilities. People can recognize many improbabilities. So however, itong si Sluman, sabi niya we need both complementary systems, the associative and the rule-based system. We need to respond quickly and easily to everyday situations based on observed similarities and and temporal contiguities. Yet we also need a means for evaluating our responses more deliberately. Systems may be conceptualized within a connectionist framework. So I believe also this connectionist was already tackled with the other reporters. So in a connectionist framework, associative system represented easily in terms of pattern activation and inhibition, which readily fits the connectionist model, while the rule-based system may be represented as a system of production of rules. While deductive reasoning may occur when a given pattern of activation on one set of nodes entails or produces a particular pattern of activation in a second set of nodes, and this inductive reasoning may involve the repeated activation of a series of similar patterns across various instances. So now we are to the last slide, which is the neuroscience of reasoning. So these are the parts of the brain assigned to different tasks. The prefrontal cortex is for problem solving and decision making. The basal ganglia is for the reasoning, working memory, cognition, and learning. The left lateral frontal lobe, the lateral parietal cortex, the precuneus, the left ventral front lateral cortex is for the syllogistic reasoning. The left frontolateral cortex and the basal ganglia is for the conditional and syllogistic reasoning, and the conditional reasoning is for the increased negativity in the anterior cingulate cortex after task presentation, suggest increased cognitive control. So that's it. I'm done with my report. This is my reference, our book. So thank you for listening and have a good day.